Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for having me, everybody. Yeah, so I'm going to talk sort of about three different things, really, three parts. One, a little bit about how councils work and what they do, because I've realised that although we're all members of a political party, I can't assume that people know this unless they've actually worked in local government or are a councillor. And it really helps to support your councillors if you actually understand where they're working. I'm going to talk a bit about the AGC and what it does. If you are a councillor, I think there's a few of you in the meeting, just to remind you sort of what support there is and how to find it. But also if you're not a councillor, it's really, really useful as a resource. And certainly if you're a target candidate, it's worth getting to find your way around where all the help and support is before you're elected, because once you're elected, you won't have time for your feet to touch the ground. So it's really good to already have that in place. And then thirdly, just how other people in local parties can support their Green councillors. And even if you don't have a Green councillor in your local party or in your local council, I'll just talk quickly through ways that you can support other councillors in your area. So local government minefield, it is a minefield. It's really confusing. Even if you just go and vote, sometimes you feel it's really confusing. But firstly, what is the AGC? So we're an autonomous membership network within the Green Party. We used to be sort of very separate and autonomous, but we've managed to sort of make better links and be more sort of mainstream, I suppose, in the party now that there's more councillors. And we support Green Party councillors at every level of local government. So it's district councillors, county councillors, London Assembly, but also town and parish councillors, who are really, really important, you know, because we all believe so strongly in community level action and localism. So town and parish councillors can be really effective. We provide support and advice, particularly by helping people share good practice and share their own experiences. Everybody's an expert. We facilitate the input of Green councillors into other parts of the Green Party, so that where policy is being developed or where election strategy is being planned, then it's obviously really important to have the input of elected councillors into those processes, and also into the Local Government Association, which is the body that represents all councillors in the country and has influence with government. So that's really important. And then thirdly, I hope that we raise the profile of Green councillors by sharing their achievements, just showing really what a difference it makes to have Greens in the room, because it really does. Even if there's only one councillor and Green councillor, we can really show what a difference that makes to the local authority. I work part-time, I'm a paid worker part-time, and I mainly work with the field organisers, so that the people who are helping you win the elections. I suppose what happens normally is that the field organisers support local parties and candidates until somebody's elected, and then they're sort of passed over to me, and I look after and support them from there on. I also work very closely with Julian Dean, who's at the moment paid to support councillors, particularly around climate change work. And obviously most of what councillors do is linked to our concerns about climate change. So we work very closely together. There's a board of AGC members that kind of give me direction. And as was said earlier, the work's funded entirely through the How to Win Elections manuals and through subscriptions from councillors. So if you haven't got a manual, I'll tell you how to buy one at the end. We've got around 860 members. It does change day by day, so it's something like that. So it's a lot. Around 338 councillors on 357 seats. There are some councillors who sit on 2 different councils, which is why the numbers aren't quite the same. We do have some links to some of our Green colleagues in Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. And we have about 255 parish and town councillors. I know there are more of them in the Green Party, but there isn't a national sort of database, so I only know if people tell me. So if you're a parish councillor or a town councillor and you don't ever hear from me, it's probably because I don't know that you are. So please email me afterwards and tell me, because it'd be really nice to get in touch with you. And we have nearly 300 non-elected members as well, who just like to keep in touch with what the councillors are doing. So it's open to everybody. So I'm just quickly going to run through some of the terminology I'm using. What is a principal authority council, and what are the different powers they have? It is important, if you're aiming to support your councillors, it's important to know this, because then you've got a bit more understanding of the sort of and expectations about what they're going to be able to achieve, and may not be so frustrated if you think they're not doing something about an issue you think they should be. It's also just useful when you're canvassing and out on the doorstep, because the general public haven't a clue about this. It is complicated. So when we talk about principal authorities, we're talking county, district, city, metropolitan borough, unitary. And they are the local authorities that have a legal status. They have to actually deliver certain services by law. And then beneath that, you have parish and town councils, which don't actually have any legal requirements of what they have to provide, but they have powers to do pretty much what they want. So if you're on a town and parish council, if you can persuade your electorate to pay enough council tax, you can basically do what you want. They actually have a huge amount of power. So those are the levels we're talking about. It is different in different parts of the country. I mean, over in the eastern region, you can see you definitely, generally you've got the two-tier system. So you have county and district. And this is, I'm not going to describe this table, but I just wanted to say that this table comes out of a really good booklet called Be a Councillor. So if you're wondering about whether you'd like to stand for election or you want to know more about what your council's doing, the Be a Councillor booklet was produced with a lot of examples of green councillors in it and who they are and what they do and what they think about being a councillor. We produced it with the Local Government Association, and there's a link to it on the members' website. If you go to the councillors section, you'll find it. So I just put this in to sort of tell you that book's there really, because it's really useful, and there's lots of background information about how councils work and who does what. And as you can see just by all the crosses in the big table, it's actually quite complicated. So when you're haranguing, someone's haranguing you because the council hasn't done anything about, you know, the library, for example, well, the first thing is to check whether it's actually their responsibility. I'll skim over this slide. This is just to add to confusion where there are regional mayors, but I don't think that's relevant here, so we'll ignore that. So how long councillors serve is usually 4 years, unless they've been elected in a by-election. So if somebody stood down or died or something happened mid-term, there might be someone elected for less time and they would just serve until the next elections. That's not quite the case at the moment. All the May elections were postponed this year, which means that anyone who thought that they were due to stand down in May has actually got to be a councillor for another year, whether they wanted to or not. So if you were due to stand for re-election, it might have felt like a great thing. If you were due to end your term of office, you might find yourself being a councillor for another year. So if that's relevant to any councillors in your party, just spare a thought for them, because in their minds they may have moved on and they thought they were going to be doing other things by now. So all councillors are automatically members of the AGC when they get elected. They just get added to our mailing list, they get a newsletter, they can vote at our AGM. And they can input into strategy, and you know, we do keep in touch with them. But really, the main benefit of the AGC is if you pay an annual subscription, then you can access all the support and the information and resources. So, as I said, that's what funds the AGC, and we really encourage all councillors to subscribe. I think in most other political parties, councillors have to pay a proportion of their council allowance to the party. We don't require that because we know that a lot of our councillors have actually given up paid work in order to be councillors, and many of them are living on incredibly low incomes. So we don't require that, but we do strongly encourage it, and we do have a sliding scale, so hopefully nobody feels they can't afford to subscribe. If you're not a councillor, it's only £10 a year, so definitely worth subscribing. So what kind of support do we provide? Firstly, we've lots of advice, tips on how to be effective. So how to manage your time, how to find your way around the council, how do meetings work, what sort of process do you need to go through to actually get a motion on your council agenda. If you're on the scrutiny committee, what does that mean? How can you actually challenge your council if you're not in power, but you don't, you're not sure that what they're doing is what you think they should be doing? And more recently, certainly in the last year, one of the really important areas where we've been sharing a lot of good practice is what do you do if you hold the balance of power? Because in the last year, we've had loads of local authorities where there's been no overall control. And although there might only be maybe even only one Green councillor on the council, the Greens have held the balance of power, and both the main parties have been sort of fighting over the Greens, wanting them to be part of their coalition, and so they can run the council. So we do now have 17 local authorities where the Greens are part of the ruling administration, where we are actually in power, which you know, was a very new experience for most councillors. So sharing good practice on those kind of issues could be really, really useful. We also have a lot of resources which are all stored online. They're all on the members' website in the green spaces area where all the groups are. And there's a group called the AGC Subscribers Group. So in there are things like council motions that other councillors have put to their council, which just means that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and think it all through again. And it also means that we can, now and then we've managed to have quite a coordinated effort where councillors across the country have put a motion on the same issue at the same time. The most notable, obviously, you'll be very aware of is the motion to declare a climate change emergency. So, you know, that became a national thing really, and the government declared an emergency, and XR adopted it as one of their sort of demands. That started from Green Councillors. That was Green Councillors putting motions to their councils, and obviously, you know, it's not exclusively a thing that Green Councillors are doing now, which is fantastic. But that shows, I think, the power of collective action. We've also got a lot of good guides on how to develop your carbon reduction plan, your climate change action plan in your council. There's resources on new bits of legislation. This has been particularly useful around COVID, where there's been new government guidance coming out, you know, every week. So we've got a dedicated page where councillors can find all the stuff they need to know about COVID. Information about training, other sources of support, all there on the subscribers group in Green Spaces. And then one of the things that I think most people find most useful are the online forums where councillors can share amongst themselves. We've got a really active Slack discussion group and a really active Facebook group. And more recently, I think really since probably since lockdown, people have got much more used to communicating online, which in that way has been really, really good. And we've had a whole kind of pile of regional and special interest WhatsApp groups springing up so that councillors can talk to each other and share what they're doing and ask each other for advice. And I'm always incredibly impressed how much time other councillors put into giving advice to those that ask. We have access to mentoring and coaching and training, professional mentors, professional coaches, which I think is really important. I think now we've got 3 Green Party members who are professional coaches who are offering their services to councillors. And we're offering this in particular to our lone Green councillors. I shouldn't say lone because they're not alone, but our sole Green councillors, those that are the only Green on their council. Because sometimes it's really good just to have a talk through with someone. If you're not feeling very confident or you're not feeling that you're making any difference there on your own, battling away, or you're just struggling to know how to manage your time and how to use your time the most effectively when there's just so much you could be doing. And we also have access to peer mentors through the Local Government Association. That's really much more about, I suppose, political strategy advice. You know, how's the best way to get people on board to support this particular issue in your council? What are the guidelines? What's the sort of code of conduct of your council mean, for example? And we have free training at our annual conference and other events. Our annual conference is next weekend, so if you're in the conference mood after today, look it up and do register and come and join us next weekend. And then particularly, I think particularly for newer councillors, this personal and emotional support is really important. The council chambers can be quite brutal places. You know, politics is nasty sometimes, and it's really important to sort of feel that if people are attacking you and being quite vicious, that it's not actually personal, because it can feel very personal and it can feel very stressful. So there is access to counselling and that sort of personal support as well. And I think that's where other online networks, Green Councillors getting together with shared experience. We've had a women's group that had some training last year. We've got an LGBTIQA group that's just set up for councillors. So I think that can be really useful as well. So the last area where the AGC works, as I said, is trying to raise the profile of what councillors are up to. If you are interested, I mentioned earlier the councillor section on the members' website. There's a lot of pages of useful information there. I haven't seen Green Herald for a while, but when the Green Herald comes out, we do try and help councillors to share their success stories in there. And we do work quite closely with the National head office press department, so that the national press stories can have a local angle where possible, and that we can feed up what our councillors are doing to illustrate, if you like, the national issues that the press are talking about. If you want to know more about what councillors have been doing, you can follow us on Twitter. You can. We've also got an external website, the agc.greenparty.org.uk website, which the public can access and see what we're up to. And there's a page there of green achievements, some of the things that Green Councillors have achieved over the last few months. So I mentioned earlier, obviously, current priority has been support in COVID-19. It's been an incredibly stressful time for everybody in very different ways, but for local authorities, there was obviously a legislative requirement to support people who were struggling and people who were isolating at home. At the same time, most councils had to actually shift from working in council offices to working online in a matter of weeks, totally change the way they work. They had to look after their own staff who were out, emptying the bins or whatever, viewing key roles that couldn't stop. So it was a very, very difficult time for many councillors as well. There was quite a lack of democracy for several weeks when all these changes were taking place, and councils have been quite varied in how quickly they've got back online and got back to having proper scrutiny meetings, proper council meetings. And I think for some of our councillors who are not in power in their council, it has been easy to feel quite out of the loop and not sure what's going on, because there's been much more of sort of delegating powers to the chief exec and the leader of the council. And we really need to make sure that those powers come back now to the councillors, and that the public know what decisions are being made, and that contentious decisions are not just being passed through on the quiet at the moment while they think nobody's looking. So we've been working a lot around democracy, a lot around that just mutual aid support, making sure the most vulnerable were being supported at the beginning of lockdown. And then obviously the kind of easing of lockdown has caused a number of problems for local authorities, which we could all see coming. The lack of the sort of opening up of allowing people to go out for the day before the public toilets were open, is just one example. So any green councillors that are in a tourist area have been battling with those kind of issues for a couple of months now. It's been really useful that throughout all that time we've worked much more closely with the party leadership. Sian and Jonathan obviously are both councillors, so that helps. And we've had a very good sort of coordinated effort on various issues, for example, calling for a local track and trace system, where the local councillors, I've just lost a few, I'll go back. Where was I? Right, sorry about that. Calling for a local track and trace system, knowing that their local authorities have got the skills and the staff that could provide that. So that's been really helpful. So how can you support your green councillors? If you're not a councillor yourself, there's masses you can do to help them. And one really easy thing you can do if you use social media is to just help raise their profile by finding who your green councillors are in your area, in your region, or even anywhere in the country, to be honest, and follow them on social media. Follow, like, and share are the three. This is sort of mantra. Just follow what they're saying. Get their messages out to more of your friends as well. As I mentioned right at the beginning, it's actually really helpful to find out a bit more about how your local council works and what the role of councillor entails. That can really help your councillors if they just want a sounding board. Some councillors, particularly if they're the only one on the council, they've really appreciated getting a group of 3 or 4 people from their local party just around them that they can talk through with them what their strategy might be, how they might tackle a certain issue, what their priorities might be. And you can do that much more effectively if you understand how the council operates and what the different committees do, what the time frames are. It's actually much easier to do this at the moment because you can go to any council meeting you want from the comfort of your own living room, because they're all online. You don't have the embarrassment of going for 10 minutes and then realising that it's actually really quite tedious and wanting to leave without anyone noticing you walking out the door at the back, because you can just leave the online meeting very easily. So I would encourage you to go to one of your local council's meetings if you haven't. See what happens. And we have a really good welcome guide that we send out to all our new councillors, which again is on the members' website. So it's quite a good read to help explain how councils work. So that's something you could do. And most importantly, ask your local councillors, if you've got any green councillors, just what help or support they would find useful. A lot of councillors have said to me that somebody to do some research for them would be really, really useful. If they're going to try and be proactive and put motions to their council to try and bring up new ideas and persuade other councillors to take a different tack, then often they need a lot of evidence to support the ideas that they're putting forward, and they just don't have the time to do the research. So if there's an area that you know particularly a lot about, or you're just interested in, then if you subscribe to the AGC, you can also access an awful lot of information from what other councillors are doing, maybe collect that information together to help inform your local councillor. And many of the councillors say they actually struggle to keep up with all the information that's flying around the AGC because they haven't got the time. So maybe that's something you could do for them and pick out the bits that might be relevant on the issues that they're interested in. Obviously, if your ward councillor isn't a Green, then lobby them to support the things that the Green councillors are trying to move forward. Obviously, climate emergency actions are at the top of that agenda. And one of the things that's really important with that is that, you know, as you'll be aware, the kind of action that needs taking to actually become carbon neutral by 2030 is incredibly radical action that is going to really impact on all our lives in a major way. And so when the council has to actually start putting forward proposals to deal with some of that, for example, building a massive solar park in a site of special scientific interest, for example, you know, it might be that it's really important to support that proposal because there'll be lots of other people objecting to it. Or a planning application for a wind farm. You know, if we want these things to happen, we really need to support them. And so often with planning applications, the council only receives input from the public when they want to object to something. And I'm sure you've all, you know, demonstrated against so many things in your life, but we really need to demonstrate for the things we want as well. So you can really support your Green councillors by proactively supporting controversial proposals to show that there is public support for them. There's a lot more about the climate emergency work that the councillors are doing on the climate emergency resources page in the councillors section on the website. That's available for all party members to see, not just councillors, so that you can do some of that work with your councillors even if they're not Green. I think I've left time for some questions, hopefully. So that slide is just contact details, just to remind you. What's that mean? Sorry, my headphones are doing funny things. Just to remind you that there's the councillor section on the members website where a lot of useful information about being councillors is. I'm just going to mention in that one actually the defection protocol, because this issue's come up a few times recently, where a local party's been approached by a councillor from a different party, maybe Labour or Conservative, who's just had it up to here with their party and wants to leave and wants to join the Green Party. If that happens, the first thing to do is to contact me and contact your field organiser and let us know, and have a read of the defection protocol, because there is a process to go through. We don't just accept anyone who wants to join us. We need to know that they're not going to be a liability to us. So have a look at those pages. If you are a subscribed AGC member, there's the Space on Green Spaces, the group there where all the resources are. And if you're subscribed, you can also get to the Facebook group and the Slack group as well. And then my contact details, it's just a Green Party email address. And Julian Dean, who's the Climate Change Support Officer for the councillors, also just a Green Party email address if you want to contact him. So I think that's all I'm planning to say. If anyone's got any questions and there's time for that, if that's allowed, hopefully I've left time for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally, for that. That was really interesting and intriguing, especially on how local members can actually help their councillors and local authorities. So we've got we've got 15 minutes for questions. That's plenty of time. So if anybody does have any questions, please put them into the chat, and I'm sure Adrian, who is the facilitator, will be able to track those down, and we can sift through those. I think there is, I think someone has asked if the presentation will be available, as it's very succinct and useful. Is that possible that we can obviously share?
I can put it in the link now if you like. Well, I'll put it in the link when I've stopped answering questions. I can't do two things at once.
No,
I will do that in a minute.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. Has anybody got any questions they want to fire at? You might as well, while Sally is here, please use her. I have, Sally, just to let you know, that I have put some links into the AGC to subscribe to the AGC, but also on how to win local elections as well, that people can obviously order those from AGC. And obviously the donations of £20 that are purchased from that goes to the AGC for the fantastic work that they do. I think there is a question. Gosh, there might be two now. So I think the one question is, how can we successfully challenge decisions being made by cabinet members under delegated authority, particular planning decisions?
So I'm not going to give a detailed answer to that, because as I said earlier, the main way that the AGC works is that it's about mutual support. And I'm not a councillor, so that's what I would say to a councillor who asks me that question is definitely post that question on Facebook, ask for the peer mentor, post it in the Slack group, and councillors who are far more experienced than you will answer your question for you. So I don't know is the answer. I don't know a lot of detail of planning law, it's complicated, but I do know people, I do know that there are people who know. And so the most effective way to get good advice about how to challenge will be to talk to other councillors. And it may depend a bit on the particular situation you're in and the political makeup of the council and who your allies are. So yeah, it's not, I'm afraid I'm not just going to give a simple answer to that one.
Right, so someone has asked a question. Realistically, how much time does being a town councillor take up? By that I mean, how feasible is it to maintain a full-time job while also being an effective councillor? I think this is actually a really good question.
A really good question. I think you said town councillor, didn't you? I mean, yeah, so there are so many things. I mean, really it's as long as a piece of string. There are so many things that depend. So partly it's about how keen you are and how proactive. As a town or parish councillor, there's usually a very limited amount of staff of officer support. I know this because I am a town councillor, and it can be quite frustrating because you have a really good idea of something you think would be great for the council to do, and basically every time you have a good idea you have to do something about it because there actually isn't anyone else to do anything about it. So really you put in as much time as you want to. If you haven't got much time, actually it doesn't have to be a lot of time. Most councils have a meeting once a month or once every 6 weeks. They'll probably have 2 or 3 different committees. You'll probably be on one of them. So you might have a meeting of that committee once a month or once every 6 weeks. And that would be the barest minimum. So it doesn't have to be a big commitment, and you can make quite a difference by just being there at those meetings. But being on a town or parish council is a bit more like doing community development work. You do actually, it gives you the it sort of gives you the opening to go and do all kinds of other things in your community and get involved in various projects and to sort of push things forward. So you can put a lot of time into it if you want to. The other thing that can depend, it depends how many other green councillors there are. If you're the only one, then everything you want to happen, you have to do it. If there's a big group of you, obviously you share that around a bit more. If there's so many of you that you're actually in control of the council, then you may find it goes the other way, and actually it takes a bit more time because obviously you've got more decisions to make. You're not in opposition, you're actually running the council. So my husband Simon Pickering is a district councillor, and they are part of the ruling administration in Stroud district, and he's a cabinet member or committee chair. So that's a massive job. If he was a sole councillor on the district council without any other Greens and without a cabinet role, it wouldn't be half as much time. So unfortunately, it's not a really quick and easy answer again. What I'd say is if you're sort of considering whether you might be able to do it, then yes, go for it, because even the smallest amount of time really makes a difference. And then as and when you've got a bit more time, you can put a bit more time in.
Thanks for that, Sally. Let me just get to another one quickly. Sorry, my laptop. Another one has come in to say, I find it quite complicated because of some of the issues you need to talk to the city and county about, issues that can only be changed at national level, and then you feel like you are wasting your time. Councillors from other parties co-opt our proposals and then say it's their proposal. That's very frustrating. I think maybe the question around that is how can we obviously work around that and work better, obviously, so anything that we propose other parties don't kind of use for their own political benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating, and it's one of the frustrating things about being a councillor is that, you know, local authorities actually have quite limited powers, and, you know, I think sometimes the general public expect a lot more from their council that the councils actually don't have any say over, because basically local authorities are implementing national legislation. You know, it's often the national legislation that needs to change, particularly around planning law. That's one of the big sort of barriers to moving forward on climate change action. But this is where the AGC is, I think, trying more and more and being more and more effective at working with our local party leadership and with parliamentary colleagues. So, you know, the more we can feed back to Caroline's office and to Jenny and Natalie in the Lords, what national legislation our local councillors can see needs changing in order for them to do as much as they want to do and to, you know, to make the effective change they want to locally, then that really, you know, that really gives ammunition, if you like, to the parliamentary colleagues of ours. And that's also where we really encourage our councillors to get involved with the Local Government Association. All Green Councillors are part of the independent group there, and that does have quite a lot of influence with government. So, and we find ourselves having all kinds of unlikely allies as well. So, you know, we can influence through the LGA, and we can add our local experience to the national voice of the party that's campaigning for the national legislative changes. There are quite often consultations and you know, times when local authorities are asked for their views on such things as well. So I think the other thing our councils are very effective at doing, even when there's only one or two Greens on the council, is they're very effective at changing the views of councillors from the mainstream parties. There are lots of Labour councillors, lots of Conservative councillors and lots of Lib Dem councillors who agree with a lot of what our Green councillors are saying. And, you know, most people are in a particular political party just because that party asked them to stand. Most people are not hugely political in the other parties, and they joined the Labour Party because it was the Labour Party that asked them first. And actually, as an aside, you know, we need to get much more proactive about asking community activists that we see doing great stuff in our communities. We need to ask them to stand for the Greens. But putting that aside, so we find we get all kinds of allies from other parties, and the more we can convince them of our arguments and what changes we see are needed, the more that will feed into their national policy, and they can help to make those changes happen nationally as well. It's a very slow process, but that's what we need to do.
Thanks for that, Sally. Let me see if we've got any more questions. So Anna has asked, how much do the budget cuts and austerity measures limit the ability of councils to act on green policies, and what can we do about it?
They absolutely limit councils' ability to act on anything, let alone green. I mean, I think what Green councillors are getting very good at doing is putting the economic benefit arguments and the health and wellbeing benefit arguments. The way to enact our green policies is not just to sort of brand them as, you know, you've got to do this because it's green and we want to save the planet. There's always lots of other good reasons to do them, you know, as you'll all be well aware. So, for example, you know, the coming out of lockdown priority for developing more space for cycling and walking on roads in order to help with social distancing. You know, actually Greens have been calling for that for years. We want to reduce car use, we want more walking and cycling. Now we've got something to hook that onto, because the government's realised that if we all get in our cars, that the roads will be absolutely gridlocked. So we have to prioritise walking and cycling. So what Green Councillors do is they grab the opportunities to push the green policy that they wanted to push anyway, when there's a reason they can do that. So walking and cycling is a big one at the moment. In terms of climate change, it's becoming something about money, really. You know, you might be investing in renewable technology is going to save money. Recycling, you know, as the cost of throwing rubbish into a tip becomes more expensive, then it becomes more economically viable to recycle. And you know, Conservative councils in particular are really keen on value for money. They're really keen on saving money. So if you can put a green policy forward and show that it's actually an economically beneficial thing to do, then they'll support it. So, you know, often it's about making sure it doesn't sound that you're just wanting to be green for the sake of being green. It's about something, about other reasons. But austerity cuts have been really difficult. Everything's been cut to the bone. And then obviously the COVID crisis has caused a massive crisis, and you'll have seen that in the news in the last few weeks, that most local authorities are going to have millions and millions of pounds worth of budget hole, and no guarantee that that's going to be covered by government yet. So I think many district councils are wondering whether they'll actually go bankrupt and won't come through this. And we know that the government's quite keen on moving to unitaries, so it may not be that bothered of them going bankrupt. So that is something that our Greens that are in power in particular at the moment are working very hard on, to put a much more concrete set of demands for what kind of financial support they think councils need, more concrete than what we've been seeing coming from the LGA or anywhere else at the moment. So that's, yeah, that is a big concern at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that, Sally. Long, detailed answer. So let me just, we have a couple more questions we're going to do. We've got 5 more minutes left. So next question is, how do we make it clear it is our policy and not the party's policy?
I don't know who our is in that question, but obviously the Green Party doesn't have a party whip, so there will be times when Green councillors don't agree with each other and don't all vote the same way on something, but hopefully whatever policies they are putting forward will be Green Party policy, because we really don't like councillors or anybody sort of publicly promoting policy that's not Green Party policy, unless they're really clear that it's their own personal view and not the party policy. Yeah,
I think the question was actually, how do we make it clear it is our policy and not the other party's policy?
Sorry, okay.
No, that was my error.
Yeah. I think that's about trying to get in really quick with the publicity around what you're doing. You know, make sure you proactively get a press release out saying that this is what the Greens are proposing before someone else grabs it. But to be honest, one of the things that the Greens have been very good at, and actually the public are really crying out for, is more collaborative politics. And as I said, we've got 17 councils now where the Greens are in power along with other parties. We wouldn't be in power on our own. We don't hold a majority, but we're working in all kinds of different formal agreements and arrangements and alliances with Labour or with Lib Dem or with Conservatives. And that is all about, you know, building alliances, agreeing together how to move things forward. So we don't always get the credit for everything. We don't always, the public won't always know that it's a green policy. The example I know the best is Stroud, where I live. It's an alliance of Labour, Green and 1 Lib Dem. So in practice, it's kind of Labour and Green. Most of the really good things the council does are green, promoted by the Greens. The ideas for the Greens, they push it forward. And because the leader of the council is Labour, you know, the press release will normally say the leader of the council, Labour, said this, that and the other, and it tends to sound like Labour have done a great thing. Actually, those things wouldn't be happening if the Greens weren't in power. So we have to, you know, do as much as we can to make it clear that we push these things forward. But we've got to be really careful not to knock our partners, otherwise, because we've got to work with them and we've got to have good relationships with them. And it's like walking on a tightrope the whole time, to keep a good, positive working relationship where things can move forward and things can happen. whilst at the same time being really clear that we're not in the Labour Party, and we don't agree with them on everything, and come election time we're absolutely going to be up against them, not working with them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think one final question. Okay, this is hard. I've got like another question coming through. We might be able to do it, depending if people want to stick around for maybe a couple more minutes afterwards. So in 2 minutes-ish, one question is, how can our councillors, as well as the executive team for the local party, engage at policy making, campaigning can avoid being paralysed, and potential collaborations with NGOs and other parties heading to similar destination, as in a claiming ownership. So I think in some instances where other parties have claimed ownership, where one party's obviously got something banned, but other parties have obviously claimed to say that we did that. Obviously, we kind of answered that earlier on. But obviously, what else can we really do to kind of harness that? Obviously, being quick with press releases, etc., and getting the word out there. What can we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've probably answered it in the last question, that it is really important to be very proactive in your sort of publicity about what the councillors are doing, what the party's doing, to show that these ideas are coming from us. I mean, in the AGC, I think there's quite a different emphasis. It's not really about campaigning. We're not a campaigning organisation, we're a political party, aren't we? And councillors are actually making decisions and running their local areas. They're not campaigning, they're running the council. So I suppose it's a different emphasis from where I'm sitting, really. And I suppose there's still quite a debate going on nationally in the party with that sort of tension between people who see us as a campaigning organisation and those who are saying, actually, we're a political party, we're the political wing of these other campaigning organisations. So there will be initiatives and there'll be ideas that come from other organisations, and actually that's fine. We need to work together and contribute the particular unique thing that we have in our organisation in order to achieve collective goals. And the way Green Councillors have been very effective at working in alliances with politicians from other parties on their local councils is to sort of try and get them to concentrate on what are the aims that we share, what are the things that we agree on, and just ignore the things we don't agree on. And then if we know what the things we both agree on are and we work together and achieve them, then it doesn't matter actually who gets the credit for it in the end, because we've achieved the aim that we wanted. And I think certainly, from the practical perspective of where councillors are sitting, it's much more important to actually achieve the policies and the services that we want, rather than worry too much about who gets the credit. The reason for wanting to get the credit, obviously, is because then we get more people elected, because people see the Greens are great. But actually, you have to do that as an individual councillor. You have to really show people what you've achieved, what your track record's been as a councillor, through social media or whatever.